I've been asked today to elaborate on some comments that I made in a previous video called The Source of the Force, the Hidden Inspiration of Star Wars, which was a video and an article that I wrote that's been posted on the Millennium Report. And it needs to be elaborated on because a question was asked during that video, during an interview with me, with Julian Jonathan, and he asked me about the Force and really what it was. It was too much of a subject to cover at that time. So I'd like today to speak upon what really the original idea that was given by the Waldorf students at the Waldorf Institute that I was part of to Marcia Griffin Lucas, George Lucas's wife, before the Star Wars trilogy came out. We sat and we went over these things, and the first day was upon the plot. So if you saw the previous video, Source of the Force, that was day one of a 3-day think tank. Day 2 and 3 was an explanation of what was already sketched out in some of the story, which referred to certain crystals and forces and the type of weapons that a Jedi Master would have, and what the training of the Jedi Master would be that could open them up to the Force. What is this Force? Because George Lucas had the idea, of course, of Jedi Bindu knights who protected the realm, but it wasn't really carved in stone. And the concept of the lightsaber was yet to be developed at that time, except that there was a reference to one of the characters carrying a laser saber, as it was referred to. So there is an anthroposophy from the work of Rudolf Steiner, which I say had something to do with inspiring Marcia and the others who helped work on this movie, some of which were Waldorf parents, as a matter of fact. George Lucas was a Waldorf parent, and so was Spielberg and Harrison Ford. It's well known they all met at the Marin Waldorf School, and that it was out of that meeting that they decided to work together. Marcia Griffin was already the most brilliant film editor in Hollywood at the time, with Coppola and Scorsese. Before Star Wars came out, she'd already won awards. She was a tremendous person. I didn't know at the time that I met with her, and we had this conversation. So on day one, I was asked to kind of create a fairy tale, a sci-fi, a fairy tale for adults. So that's what we worked on. That's what the first video is about. This is going to get complicated, so it might be, except for those who are really Star Wars fans, or are fans of anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, or fans of what is called esoteric anatomy, or occult anatomy, which one could say in the past was the study of Kundalini, or in the present time, or in the past, the study of chakras, but in the present time, all these new ways to work with the chakras and the electrical bodies, the bioelectric bodies. These things, over the 38 years that has transpired, 40 years that has transpired since these ideas were shared with Marcia Lucas, and they were shared then with George, and he put them into some of the movies, these haven't changed. As a matter of fact, the scientific discoveries have proven that what Rudolf Steiner had said about these issues were true. So what we shared with Marcia at the time in the early 70s still stands true for today. So I'm going to explain the concept of etherization of the blood. Now, if you look out on in Vimeo and other places, that I have videos on that specific topic, the etherization of the blood. It's rather complicated. I'm not going to get into that today. I'm going to get into the Star Wars version of the etherization of the blood, because unfortunately, George Lucas, when he makes references to the Kyber crystals are what runs a Jedi's lightsaber, it gets pretty dicey. The original story actually was all about 2 Kyber crystals, one which Luke and Leia were going to take from this planet to join with the Resistance to fight the Kyber crystal that was on the Death Star. Most people don't realize this, but if you read all the books and look into the Clone Wars and all these different stories that came out of Lucas's inspiration, working with other writers, you'll see references to these things, and you can start to piece together what has been given, which is not much, by the way. And then recently, Charlie Rose did an interview with George Lucas, and they talked about many of these subjects. So just by chance, I got to see that, and it actually inspired me to make these remarks today. We shared with Marcia the fact that a Jedi Knight wouldn't have a weapon. They don't fight. That's why Yoda didn't fight. The ultimate Jedi did not fight. He used the Force. And the reason he could use the Force is because he had a lightsaber, but the lightsaber wasn't a weapon that was external from his body, it was inside of his body. If a spiritual person raises energy through consciousness and focus, like is called Kundalini, a cycle can be created where the crystals in the pineal gland work with the pituitary gland to excrete pituitrin, which then drives a cycle that causes a lightsaber, one would say, this column of light that is in front of the body. And this is the second spinal column. It's called the etherization of the blood, according to Rudolf Steiner. It's also called the earthly and cosmic nutrition stream, because the part that I think you don't find in Star Wars, what people are hoping these next 3 movies will say, is what is the spirit? Where did the Jedi come from? Can I become like a Jedi? That's why I think there's a Jedi religion at this point. People saw there was spiritual wisdom that was there, but it doesn't quite work out, because as George Lucas was going on, he had to work with actors quitting their contracts. He had to work with changes from the studio itself that refused to take some of his ideas, so he couldn't really do everything he wanted. And as he did it over time, things changed and manifested in different ways. So at first, this is what was recommended. A Jedi Knight doesn't have a weapon. He has a lightsaber. Now, what is a lightsaber? It works with crystals in the base of it, crystals that are chosen by the Jedi from usually the planet Ilum. They go down into the caves and they find the red or the green or the white crystals that relate to their own resonance, and they put it inside of the lightsaber with the help of a droid that builds that lightsaber. Everyone is tuned to the resonance of that Jedi Knight. Well, the evil knights that tend towards the evil choose red crystals, unfortunately, or make synthetic crystals that turn out to be red, that are even more powerful than the Kyber crystals found on the planet Ilum. And even in this new Star Wars series, the lightsaber used by that Sith Lord is more powerful than some lightsabers. Why? Because it's made of synthetic crystals, which actually are supercharged with certain forces that they experimented with. None of these things really appear in the Star Wars series on the screen, but they appear in the books. So a Kyber crystal that you would go to get as a Jedi warrior to put into your own lightsaber is really happening in your physical body, and I'll describe that in a minute. But it isn't outside of your body. But it's really cool the way that they use it as a sword. But what does it do? It repels any attack against it. That's why it looks though the Jedi can send the energy back to where it came from, like batting it like a baseball and a bat. No, that isn't what's happening. It is a shield around them, that was the original idea, that was to repel anything that came at them with an equal but opposite force, which is the basis of Qigong and other martial arts. And the stronger they concentrated, the stronger their force field. But they also had the power to use that to cut through things, just like with the third eye can cut through things. But they couldn't harm people with it. They could only defend themselves. And if you listen to the words of Yoda, that's what he says. And those are actually the precepts of being a Jedi Knight. Unfortunately, it turned into, cowboys and Indians and the West, wild West out in space and all that kind of stuff. But to begin with, it was about etherization of the blood, which I'll explain in a minute. Why did George Lucas have at the beginning Darth Vader going for the Kyber crystal at the same time that Luke and Leia were? Because that was supposed to be the big balance scene between who has the Kyber crystal. Now, this has made Star Wars fans a little bit upset, because they know that the spirit is not a rock, per se. They know that if there's a force that he says in Star Wars pervades all living things, good, they agree with that. It's in the blood, they agree with that. But then he says it's mitochondrial DNA. Well, there's no mitochondria in blood cells. So if it's in the blood cells in the bloodstream, whatever he's talking about, it's not an organelle, and it can't be a mitochondria. So what is this force that is concentrated in the blood of a Jedi through heredity and can be found in crystals in certain places? Those crystals can be turned to the good or the bad. Darth Vader turned it to the bad, made the Death Star. Luke and Leia were going to take it from a healing temple and Pomojima and take it to where the rebels were so they could build it into a machine to fight Darth Vader and his evil machine that he had created with another crystal. They also say Darth Vader and his teacher, remember, was a hidden Sith who taught him at some point, which is not clear in the story. And also remember that Anakin Skywalker was born without a father. He had the highest midi-chlorians in his blood of anyone. No one knows how it got there. He was born without a father. Somehow there were either the evil Emperor Palpatine had somehow, when he was not appearing as a Sith Lord, planned all of this so that Anakin could then become his Padawa, his apprentice. How is it that that happened? Nobody knows. And so one can speculate. People have asked George Lucas, he won't answer. And people who are involved in it, making these movies, would ask him, and all they would always say was the answer was always the same. You have to ask George. And George didn't give out answers to these questions. So Anakin had really high midi-chlorians, didn't he? And the evil Emperor had very high. There are stories in the books that say that Sith Lords compounded midi-chlorians into crystals, or compounded the substance and used it for eugenics to create new people who already had, through heredity, midi-chlorians in their bloodstream. And that is perhaps how Anakin came to birth, through the evil machinations of his own teacher, through some type of midi-chlorian eugenics manipulation of heretic DNA and heredity. Well, that's all speculation. But you can see where this leads. You can see why Star Wars fans get very, very mad and say, don't tell me the Force is a rock. Don't tell me the Force is heredity. I want it in my blood. How do I personally develop it? And this is what was missing, because we made sure to talk about this for practically 2 days when in the think tank, because we had to give a path for spiritual development. It wasn't about being a cowboy in the wild, wild west, wielding a lightsaber and chopping people up. No, it was about the original idea that he had was much like that, but the idea that we came up with was a knight who had the characteristics of Robert Heinlein's characters called fair witnesses. They were trusted by everyone. They were impeccable. There's many examples of this in science fiction, where there are individuals who are so moral that whether on one side or the other, when they speak, everyone believes what they say. That's why a Jedi warrior, when he speaks, people do what he says, because he's moral. He wouldn't tell you to do the wrong thing. He has force, morality in his being. That's the Force. Now, where he gets that force, we'll discuss in a minute. But we can see that would be a characteristic of a Jedi warrior. Also, if need be, just like Jesuits, because we were talking about spiritual Jesuits, really, in the old days, they'd send in 2 Jesuits into any kingdom, and the Pope would begin to build an army. But by the time the army got to the gates of the city, the Jesuits would come out with the keys to the city and be teaching the royalty's children. 2 Jedi could conquer anything. 2 Jesuits could conquer practically anything, but they were also warlords. So Jesuits are like the evil example of what a Jedi Bendu Knight is. It's also like the Bene Jesuits that was in Dune, there are many characteristics that are found, like a Vulcan that doesn't have emotions in their logic, so on and so forth. So all these were rolled into this very complex character of a Jedi Knight. Unfortunately, the example of Luke's teacher, Obi-Wan, died because George Lucas had to take him out of the set because he wasn't going to participate in the other movies. That's why Obi-Wan died. That's why Yoda then became the character to take his place. So when that happened, Yoda, who was supposed to be a comic relief character on this planet where they trained as Jedi Knights, becomes then the carrier of the tradition of the Force. And it was so mystical. He's 900 years old, and he's this little tiny guy, and he can levitate. So he's conquered age, he's conquered levity, he's conquered consciousness, he's conquered his anger. Yoda is the perfect example of what Obi-Wan was supposed to be showing Luke how to become. But it's okay, because Obi-Wan worked from the spiritual world to help Luke, and then he had Yoda, and he was there when Yoda died. So Luke realized, in the fairy tale, The main character is all characters. That's what you must remember in a fairy tale. So all the characters in Star Wars are Luke. Even Leia. Leia's his spiritual twin, you see, that he didn't even know he had in existence, who helps him tremendously. And really is a fulfillment of who he is, if you think about who Leia is. And that should have been the key to the new 3 movies, but we'll see where they go. For Star Wars aficionados, let me give you the missing part, or what we'd call the unveiling of the Force. George Lucas said this, and he said the Force is everywhere, and then he made a reference to prana, but then he said the Force was in your blood. Well, prana is oxygen, it's breath, it's in your blood. But then he said it was like mitochondria. That got him in big trouble. And then he said there are crystals that it can be compounded in, Kyber crystals. Those things are all well and good, and to a certain degree, they're all true. But what that's led in some of the stories is to a dead end. Because pure animism, worship of crystals, to say a crystal is a god, well, in a way, a crystal is a frozen part of God, but to say the crystal is a god, or that the crystal is what is needed for the consciousness, that's incorrect. The midi-chlorians in your blood were there through heredity, according to him. Again, huge fallacy, huge dead end. And then Yoda taking the place of Obi-Wan, and then kind of conflating everything that you could to make him now something more revered than Obi-Wan, since he is not human, and he's not a human example, a 900-year-old teacher. Where did that go? Again, to a dead end. But as I said, remember, inside of you is every single character in Star Wars, if it is a true fairy tale. So let's look at this carefully. In your breath, in prana, and in every single substance in the world that is organic, is carbon. If you can use your breath and oxygen in your breath to change carbon into a substance that's called calcium carbonate, and you change it from the warmth in your heart, and you change these mineral substances until they deposit in your pineal gland a crystal called a calcium carbonate crystal, then you have accomplished the task of finding your Kyber crystal in the cave, because your head's the cave, you're the Jedi, you needed morality, you needed focus, you needed to transform 3 things, just like in the fairy tale there had to be 3 parts of the soul, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Han Solo, and Chewbacca, who are the 3 companions of the ego. So as the ego transforms these lower beings, you in fact transform substance. So this is really what we taught Marcia. And Marcia, I believe, knew some of this because she was a student of Rudolf Steiner of anthroposophy. I believe she studied Waldorf education to some degree. So we wanted to make sure that the lightsaber is inside of you. The lightsaber is not outside of you. It's not a tool or a weapon to use. It is something to create illumination in yourself. It's something to protect yourself. It's something to hone your focus. It's something that can come out of your hands. You see this in the evil emperor with the lightning. You can see it in their wit, in their consciousness. You can see it in conquering space and time, the evil emperor time. Remember, the evil emperor really is the tempter. He tempts everybody. He tricks everyone. He looks very nice. And then later we find out who he is. And then there's the liar, Darth Vader, the right-hand path, as we call the right-hand path, Darth Vader, the left-hand path, the evil emperor, also represented by 3CPO and R2D2 in a more mechanical way. But as this path has to be balanced, and as this energy goes up from the heart into the head, you deposit calcium carbonate crystals. This process was only recently discovered in a fairly full view. This has been known about since ancient times and written about, and it's called brain sand. Rudolf Steiner taught this, and basically that is the intent of spiritual development, is to create enough brain sand, enough of these crystals in your pineal gland so that you can get enough bioelectric energy shooting from your pineal gland to your pituitary, which causes an excretion of pituitrin, which causes then all of your nerves to light up and all of your blood to light up, and then that causes, the flaming, the appearance of a laser, the appearance of a bright column of light. And people who are clairvoyant can see this in other people. They can also see in the heart that this deposits something called the eternal drops. A clairvoyant can look directly in the pineal gland and see how much brain sand is there. Now, the trick is interesting. Rudolf Steiner had pointed out that there would be a left and a right-hand path to these crystals in the pineal gland. So my friends and I, even at that time, had a theory, and the theory's been proven to be true. That was 40 years ago, so we thought we were pretty cool, coming up with the theory in advance. We said that in the pineal gland there would have to be 3 types of crystals. There couldn't just be calcium carbonate. So only recently, in the past few years, the discovery of what's called biomineralization shows that, and they don't know how it happens, but somehow in the pineal gland is deposited more calcium carbonate crystals. They had believed up until recently that the amount of calcium carbonate crystals in your pineal gland directly impacted your IQ, your consciousness, your intelligence. And if you didn't have brain sand there, then you didn't have much intelligence. It's as simple as that. And they believed you couldn't put any more brain sand there. Wrong. That's what the Star Wars has taught us. The Force can be increased through focus. Not heredity, and not with just crystals, but the crystals inside of us and through consciousness. There's also 2 other crystals formed there. One is calcium phosphate, the left-hand path, and one is calcium calcite, which is the right-hand path. The one creates old age, the other one creates eternal youth. You really don't want eternal youth. Anyone who's ever studied that or looked into that will tell you why. And you really don't want the forces of calcium calcite, because calcium calcite, calcium itself, the more calcium in your body, the older you get, basically, ossification. The more silica in your body, which is what the pineal gland is really all about, and that's the proper mix of silica with calcium, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, create what Star Wars would call Kyber crystals, but not Kyber crystals in the cave, but Kyber crystals in a lightsaber, but the lightsaber is upside down. The handle's in your head, and that's where the crystal is, and the lightsaber goes down, because this is the return circuit of what comes up to your spine. That's called Kundalini, or the raising of your energy, the raising of your energy in your chakras, or through the channels, the Ida Pingala Sushumna, there's many names for it. But the raising of this Kundalini energy, when it hits your pineal gland, if you're moral, you become the light side. And if you're immoral and you haven't handled anger and hatred and fear, you go to the dark side. And the reason that is because the pineal gland acts as an antenna. And those crystals act not as a source of energy, and this is the whole point. That's why animism doesn't work. The crystals aren't the source of your energy. They're not the source of your being. They're not symbiotes. He insinuates that midi-chlorians are symbiotes. We'll go into that in a second, but they aren't these crystals, for sure. But this is what creates the lightsaber. This is what creates this frontal spinal column. And this has all been proven in science now, and they're finding out more about this every single day. But let's look a little bit closer. He said that midi-chlorians, and his characters in the Star Wars movies say, they're everywhere. They're in everything. What's everywhere? What's in everything? Why is it that in the blood, in just certain people through heredity, they have a focus of it? Why certain crystals naturally have a focus? How come you can compound crystals? Now remember, when the dark side compounds a crystal, what's it become? It's like uranium. It's compounded uranium. It's compounded evil. It's compounded stone, crystal. It's compounded material. You don't want to compound material. That creates negativity. That creates atomic bombs. That creates the dark side. You want to compound the proper crystals, not the crystals on the left, the calcium phosphate, not the crystals on the right, the calcium calcite, but the crystals in the middle, calcium carbonate. That is done through consciousness. This consciousness, calcium's not in everything in the world. Carbon, yes. One can say that the alchemist said that the philosopher's stone is found in everything, and especially everything alive, but also in rocks. And recently, with Charlie Rose, George Lucas himself said, when asked, what is the force? He said, well, it's like the life force that you'd find in a rock. And when Charlie Rose said, in a rock? He said, well, in a rock, in a tree. In a tree, he says, and that's where George Lucas left it. What about animals? What about humans? What about angels? And what about archangels? And what about the rest of it? So I think he did his best that he could. But in fact, what we really have here is an allusion to something which, when he said it was like mitochondria, since mitochondria or organelles do not appear in the blood, and that's where the Force focuses, and since crystals don't appear in the blood in that way, what is it? Well, I suggest to you that it's one simple thing. It's called the Philosopher's Stone. It's called white gold, powdered white gold. It appears where gold manifests in its purest strains. And when you get this white gold, it literally has levity to it. It levitates. And this has been shown in science. So they looked for the substance, and they found that if you get the white gold strains, white gold, palladium, and then the other higher metals that are found in the brain, cesium, yttrium, and a number of other ones, these are metals that can be reduced through distillation processes until they become what's called a monatomic state. They basically are nothing left but the nucleus. There's no spin on them. They're called Ormus, orbitally rearranged molecular electrons. And these create, only in the higher metals, the greatest superconductors. Without these superconducting, we cannot do much that we do in the higher states of science. These things are found everywhere in nature. Ormus and these M-class substances. Tiny dilutions. They're the hyperconnectivity between everything in the universe, basically, is the way the theory goes, because they're all at the lowest, most common, but most pure vibration possible. And then the Force, that would be true. You could pull the Force from a rock. You could pull the Force into yourself through concentration from a tree, from an animal, from yourself, from energy all about you. So the chi energy that comes in is not a stone, it's a consciousness. But this consciousness can be manipulated, and they've shown that if you take Ormus, within a few minutes, your brain goes into gamma waves and all your other brain waves enhance, which is so unusual. It means all aspects of your being are enhanced. They use it with children with great learning problems, and it's been proven and demonstrated over and over again that Ormus is basically a type of awakening. It's almost like a consciousness, as it were. It creates hyperconductivity in the brain, and particularly with brain waves. And then these brain waves, as we know, reach out and can connect to anything in our environment, even up to huge distances away. Especially once you've been next to anything and got its vibration, you can connect at great distances. So there we have it. The pineal gland controls aging. That's one of Yoda's characteristics. White gold or Ormus controls levity. That's one of the characteristics of the Force. Another characteristic of the Force is healing, and that energy can come out of your hands. This is the consciousness that is raised through the hyperconnectivity of Ormus. Now, there are many other things that we could go on. Is Ormus a symbiote? No, it isn't, but it doesn't die because it's an element. They can go, if it goes into the ground, it's going to go into another substance. If you have a lot of grape juice, Concord grape juice, or you have a lot of carrots where there's really highly purified sugars. Sugars are like enzymes, like DNA. Where you have those, high concentrates of Ormus. High concentration of Ormus in the bloodstream, high concentration of Ormus in the brain. But there's something else. It's not an organelle, it's a substance. Is it a crystal? One could call it a crystal. One could actually say it is possible that in this substance there is something that helps consciousness. Is it consciousness itself? No. Is there anything in the body that is eternal, that has levity, that can defy time and space and seems to have consciousness? There is one thing that I know of, and that's enzymes and DNA, because enzymes turn into DNA. DNA is personalized enzymes. Without an enzyme, you can't do much of anything. All life comes back to enzymes. There's one enzyme that can do 1 trillion reactions in a second. That defies time. It can get to 1 trillion other substances that relate to it in 1 second. That defies space. It's eternal. As long as it's in a biological substance, it never dies. People don't understand. When they say you need enzymes, especially the essential enzymes, those relate to the planets. Without those substances, you probably are not going to digest anything, and you have no chance, without digestion working, that your immune system is going to work. And if your immune system doesn't work, you're not going to have consciousness. You're certainly not going to have higher consciousness. It's as simple as that. So if I were to say, is there something that looks like midi-chlorians in the blood, I'd say the closest thing I've seen to that is enzymes. But I'd have to mix a little bit of Ormus in there, and then I'd have to mix a little bit of silica, because it's silica that creates also levity. I'm not going to go into that, but the balance between silica and calcium in the body is the balance between age, old age, and youth. It's the balance between the left and right-hand path, but the left-hand path has more use, and it's the first path. So we won't go into all of that. Matter of fact, those remarks will probably cause my interviewer, Julie and Jonathan, to ask me the next questions. So I think I'm going to have another talk to go a little bit further with this so that I can answer some questions, because this is, as he called them last time, thought bombs. So if you haven't heard of Ormus, if you haven't heard of the Kyber crystals, if you haven't heard that there is a thing called etherization of the blood, the earthing cosmic nutrition stream, biomineralization, that the pineal gland is really the master control and that it's really your lightsaber, I imagine this comes as a bit of a shock to you. But the point is, this was all in the mind of Marcia Griffin Lucas, when she was a major inspirer for the first 2 movies for sure, but in general the first 3 movies. So again, if there's a source to the force, it's Anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner, because myself and many others like Marcia study that. And if you're interested in that, you can look that up anywhere. But the work of Rudolf Steiner is what I believe inspired even the concept of Kyber crystals, lightsabers, and all of these things. So that's what I had to present today. Thank you so much.